Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's being hosted by Make UK and Simon Kucher. Today we will be discussing the smarter commercial strategies for tariff challenges. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes to note. All attendees are in listening mode only, and the only panelists' videos are visible today. If you wish to engage with the panelists or to ask a question, you can do so by typing your question in the Q&A box in the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your screen. Make UK will be moderating the questions and will utilise time within the discussion and at the end of the webinar for your response. We are not using the chat function today. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded and all questions sent in will be saved as part of the post report for the Make UK and panellists to answer if we run out of time during the event. Thank you, and over to James, our senior economist from Make UK's Policy Department.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I will be today's chair of this webinar and our subsequent discussion after some presentations. Today we've got our partners at Simon Kucher joining us, and we're going to be talking about commercial strategies for tariff volatility. This is, of course, a critical topic for UK manufacturers right now, not least because of the freshness of it, but of course the relative inexperience of the country having been previously part of the EU and not been used to grappling with challenges around tariffs. And with this fast-moving environment, there are opportunities to be had, and we know that from our membership, and that's what we'll be looking at today, and having our partners here at Simon Kucher to take us through what some of these commercial strategies might be. So I'm joined today from Simon Kucher by Adam Ector, partner and global head of the global industrial sector, Kim Albert, director and industrial practice lead, and Otmar Schwartz, partner and global head of technology and industrials practice. We're also joined today by Make UK's own Richard Rumbelow, director of international business, who will take you through some of the policy and some of the scene setting around how UK manufacturers have been grappling with tariffs, and will then lead in to that presentation from our colleagues from Simon Kucher. So to begin, if I could hand over to Richard to take us through some of that policy and scene setting around tariffs and its implications for UK manufacturers.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, James, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this important webinar this morning. I'm just going to say a few opening remarks at the top, just to sort of set the policy scene as we see it currently, and some expectations for what will happen perhaps in the coming weeks and months as well. And our colleagues then at Simon Kucher will then run through their presentation, which has been introduced as very critical for this particular time for members to understand managing customer relationships, pricing, and value, which are absolutely critical. So the context of where we are at the moment is that US tariffs have been applied with force and with vigor and are broad-based and have been introduced since the new US administration came into office from the earlier part of this year. However, it is not easy to forget that actually the US have been using tariffs as a trade policy tool since 2016. Much more focused in those times, much more targeted in terms of both product and country, but trade policy based on tariffs has been an integral part of how the US have been adjusting and adjudicating their trade policy for quite some time. But clearly what we're seeing now is a significant uptick in the use of those tariffs, the spread of those tariffs, the sectors by which it covers, the geographies by which it covers, and also tariffs being used for not just implications in terms of specific products or sectors, but also on the basis of who you trade with and how that trade is then sent to the US. So yes, it has been a challenging time for manufacturers in the UK, but globally, to understand and to comply with the changes in the tariff regime. But it is also important to remember as well that though this is a significant change to trade policy, the absolute majority of global trade is done outside of the US. So if you're trading on a non-US basis, then some of the impact of this will not be affected at all. But it is in itself, though, quite a significant change in policy. The UK is not immune from this. The UK, in terms of the tariff implications more broadly and in specific sectors. And though the UK has ongoing dialogue with the US through the economic partnership deal to try and limit some of those tariff impacts, both current and in the future. Of course, they are still being applied. And also, as part of that discussion with the US, it isn't just about tariffs, which are a matter of conversation and negotiation. It's also about non-tariff barriers as well, which are also important when it comes to being able to successfully place your product on the US market. In terms of some of the impacts for the UK, we have, for example, tariffs being applied quite aggressively on steel and aluminium, a reduced level currently on automobiles, and a reduced zero tariff on aviation, civil aviation, including engines and parts. But we are expecting over the course of the coming weeks and months further announcements in terms of specific and targeted tariffs applied globally, and there will be an implication for the UK in how those tariff treatments are applied. The sectors which we are expecting announcements from the US administration in the coming weeks include on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, wind turbines, medical equipment, lumber, and a number, in fact, 12 or 14 other sectors are also the subject of commercial review by the US administration with announcements expected. So what does it mean and how are manufacturers are beginning to adjust to this? And there's some sort of common themes which are coming out in terms of how the sector is adjusting. Certainly, it is looking at its supply chains, and I'm sure we will touch that in quite some detail during the course of this webinar this morning. And firms are beginning to adjust and look at what their supply chain responsibilities are, who they're trading with, and what does that mean for tariff lines going into the US. They're also looking at what to do in terms of commercial contracts, making sure their commercial contracts are up to date, making sure the Incoterms, the basis by which international trade is done, is suitable for them, and the balance and the tariff implication is one that's paid for by the customer. It is also important too for some of them to look at tariff analysis and what other mitigations they may need to take in terms of some of those supply chains. And part of that, and very important, is obviously to ensure that you're optimizing your customer's valuation and compliance. That means making sure that your documentation is accurate, making sure you've got the right classification for your goods entering the US, making sure you're providing excuse me, the right rules of origin certification requirements, which are somewhat different in the US in terms of compliance, and also making sure that your overall document set is in line with US customs requirements in terms of submission of paperwork relating to those goods. So there's a lot of administrative changes and analysis which member firms are undertaking at this stage to ensure that they are keeping on top of and compliant with the ability to supply goods into the US. But obviously, of course, the critical thing is obviously to keep informed. This is a fast changing situation. There are continual changes to announcements being applied by the US administration in terms of goods, not just, as I say, in terms of tariffs and the expectations of future tariff announcements, but also other duties, fees, and levies, which are also being applied to exports into the US, including, for example, this month, tariffs and levies on the arrival of certain ships and vessels into the US carrying products. So this is a fast-changing situation. The conversation today around pricing value is absolutely critical as part of that analysis, and I'm sure we'll look forward to our colleagues from Simon Kucher running through some of the key aspects that you as manufacturers should now be considering as part of your commercial strategies. James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That takes us on swiftly and perfectly now onto Simon Kucher and some practical steps to address exactly what Richard was telling us about just then. I believe starting with Adam from Simon Kucher.
Yes, sir. Morning, James, and welcome Make UK. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having us. As you can tell from the sound of my voice, I'm not from your side of the pond. I am a Yankee. I run our global industrial practice. I'll tell you a little bit more about Simon Kucher and Partners in a minute, but ultimately super thrilled to be here. I think Richard did an excellent job of laying out some of the things that are on people's minds. A lot of interesting questions about how do you navigate a time like this, but you should make sure to understand that we are a global firm. We think about this stuff all the time, and we're going to get into what do you do about it? So rather than having a dinner conversation and bantering around the ideas, let's get into, all right, as a business owner, someone who has to make and manufacture goods and sell them, how should I think about acting today? And what are some more kind of those strategic tactical things that we can do on the top line of our business to understand some of the pricing implications of tariffs for us and our competition? And then how might we act in the days ahead? So by quick introduction, those on the call from our side, you've got myself. I'm coming to you from the West Coast of America over in California, but I grew up in upstate New York, worked in steel mills, power plants, heavy industry for a long time, ran a P&L before coming over to the consulting side of the business. I've now been here with Oathmar for almost 15 years, and I run our global industrials practice. So I have a chance to look at industrial manufacturing companies all over the world and help them think through their monetization strategies. Oathmar and Kim are joining me. You'll hear from them in a minute from your side of the pond. And so we're trying to make sure to have that good balanced global perspective on everything that's happening. As a firm, Simon Kucher, if you're not super familiar with us, that's fine. You start doing a little bit of digging or go ahead and ask ChatGPT and they'll come back right away that we're the world's leading pricing advisors. So we've been doing this for about 40 years. There's 2,200 of us around the world, and we spend all day, every day thinking about pricing of goods and services and how to monetize, make a profit for your organization. So we'll get to that implications of tariffs in a second. But if you think of the places that we cover, there was a wonderful quote by The Economist a few years ago that said, by their estimate, we price 50% of the goods and services on the planet, including The Economist. They're one of our clients. And we cover everything. So when people want to understand, hey, what's happening in drugs or industrial manufacturing, retail products, or automotive, we've got 200 partners who specialize in these areas. So we can go super deep on those specific questions and help people understand, yeah, that thing that you saw, how maybe a Tonka truck manufacturer responded to tariffs. Here's how you could think about that if you're moving cold rolled steel around the world. Richard mentioned some of the things that are happening right now when it comes to tariff responses, and we're in that game. We're not going to be doing your supply chain detailed, where can I find another source? But we are going to help you think about that tariff exposure. And then again, what are some short-term actions we could take? But really on this long term, how is this an opportunity? How can we think about the knock-on effects of what's going on? Maybe capitalize on some of these things for ourselves. And are we tapping into the correct value? Because just like with inflation, that was a fascinating time, but it caused a lot of people to really ask themselves, how much am I worth and what can I charge? So that's the sort of things that come to light in times like this. You're in good hands when it comes to a pricing firm and the idea of tariffs. You look back in etymology, the root word of tariff is effectively price. This is nothing new. I think Richard mentioned that America has been doing it a little bit more aggressively since 2016, a little over a decade now. But practically speaking, this goes back thousands of years. And it's an idea of let's make sure that we try to control and influence volumetric trade by using a set of lists or a set of prices in order to enter the country. And it's never died down. Again, we are operating in 46 offices, 31 countries. So we have clients and friends who are in all parts of the world where tariffs are far more elevated, normal, inflation one's more rampant. I think it's just we haven't seen it in our US-UK relationship in quite some time. And so keeping the personal sides of it out, whether I think this is good or bad, it's just something that's a little bit shocking to a lot of us. But just like inflation had always been there, we'd forgot about it and then it spiked. Tariffs have always been around. So we're hearing the headlines now and we're seeing all these issues. And I think as a group in Make UK, you'd be asking yourselves, I haven't seen this in a while. What do I do? And in the next, call it 20 minutes before we get to open Q&A, we hope you stick around for some of those and have your hardest questions. We'll try to break down and articulate how you can frame this up, how you can think about it, and put some of those numbers so that you can elevate the conversation internally inside of your organization, explain what's happening, and then also take some more of those practical actions to mitigate the risk. I've got one or two more things to get across before my colleagues step in and start getting into the details of some of the things you might want to take action on. But if there's nothing else you take away from today's webinar, please make it this, that at the end of the day, tariffs are simply a wedge. If you want to look at them through an economic lens, it's a monopolistic power inserting themselves into a two-party system. And that's what you see here on the right-hand side. Now, in the three scenarios, you have no tariff, 10% and 20% tariff. And you can see that as that dark blue tariff enters the equation, both parties are impacted. The end consumer pays a higher price. The seller receives less for their goods and services, and the tariff manifests in the middle. Sounds simple. The headline story is, hey, don't worry about it. An item that's $7.50 becomes $7.75. It's a small change, just pass it through. But as I think it was conceptual in the first half of the year, the second half of the year here in America, it's coming to life, and you're actually starting to see the effects. And when the in-house inventory gets burned down, and now we're bringing in replacement costs, and the tariffs are being coming to life. And so this is the game of what's going to happen right now. Most people on the webinar might have been familiar with the concept of price elasticity. Great idea. If you ever want to try to calculate it or want to know some benchmarks, by all means, call Kim and the Simon Kucher team. But ultimately, you can think of it as the movement of volume. I mentioned before that tariffs are all about volumetric change. It's causing things to bounce and move around. That's by design. That's what the governments are trying to do. They're trying to push trade from one place to another. But it's this bounce around effect that most people don't fully understand. And that's what makes this time period so shocking for so many manufacturers. And here are the numbers. If you take that scenario and you're manufacturing in the UK and sending it over to the States, you have a marginal cost of 5, zero demand at 10, and a pretty linear response curve. At $7.50, there's no tariff. You're getting all $7.50 as the exporter, and you're moving 25,000 units. So you got your total profit over here on the side. Now in comes a 10% tariff. It seems like not a lot, but here's what happens. You have to reset the optimal sellout price. That's the sort of work we do and help companies understand what is that optimal price. And you'll know that you can't do better than that. You can price higher, make more unit margins, but you'll sell even less volume. You can sell lower unit margins, more volume, but the profit optimal price now is going to be $7.75 to make room for that tariff. You back that out and the seller comes down to $7.04. The most important part that a lot of people have struggled to understand, and we're going to see the effects of this now in the second half of the year, is that volume effect on the right-hand side, where not only are you making less unit volume, but you're selling less volume in total. And you can see it here on that last case. By the time a 20% tariff is inserted in the system, the seller is no longer making $7.50. They're making $6.67 per unit, and their unit volume has come down. And that's what really makes these things so impactful for anybody who's trying to cross-border trade. When you look at the cumulative effect, here's what it looks like. That 0% scenario, you've got your full profit scenario. As the 10% tariff comes in, flip it ahead to the next one, Kim. You'll start to see just a 10% tariff. That knocks out about 26%, about a quarter of the total profit in the system. And by inserting a 20% tariff, you basically cut profitability in half. And it's that combination of lower unit economics and lower volume that so many people have tried, they've struggled with in the last year, because this has been happening for basically since the last election cycle in America. And this is a story we've been trying to help people understand, that at the end of the day, that small change results in massive profit impact to anybody who's doing cross-border trade, and will ultimately be born in less consumption in the marketplace. And so while I'd love to have a story that everything is just going to continue to go upward, I think the numbers and history and economics would suggest to all of us that we're probably going to be moving forward into a world of a little bit less volumetric change. You are going to see a lot of it up in the air, and that's the huge opportunity for manufacturers, that not everyone is affected exactly the same. And this is going to force people to reconsider their supply chains. And that can become one of those really rare opportunities for wholesale displacement of volume. And I think a lot of UK companies are going to be in a position to capitalize on that. And that's what my colleagues Kim and Othmar will start to explain in a moment.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Adam. Hi from my side. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Kim. I'm leading the UK industrial practice here. And in that function, of course, I'm in touch with a lot of clients. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background on what we've heard so far from the market. And I think let me start with this slide, which is saying that essentially tariffs is just one more hurdle that we had to deal with, one more challenge in a series of difficult situations in the last couple of years. Yeah, so we had inflation, high cost pressures, weakening demand, and also investment uncertainty, and now also tariffs. And I mean, if we put that in a positive light, we could think that normally as UK industrial companies and manufacturers, we are now a bit used to this volatile climate. We have learned how to respond to quick changes and have developed a bit of a playbook. But even if that situation is not new, we can see that tariffs are still hitting hard. And of course, that is because of the complexity of the topic. Yeah, like take a Caterpillar, for example, who has very global supply chains. And I know that many of you in the call will have as well, at least source some of their materials or components elsewhere. The tariff landscape has become so complex that it's really difficult to oversee the situation and to take control of the situation. And what we see as a response, and we can see that also in the news, is that many companies start by looking at their supply chain, and as we see here, over half of UK firms ended supplier relationships due to tariffs. And whilst we think that is absolutely critical to also look at your supply chain, these things often take time. You have to have your negotiations. You have to find a new supplier of equal quality. So it can take a while until actually the benefits of these actions take effect. What we think is actually not looked at enough is the commercial levers that you can do. So let's say, for example, a price change or a new bundling offer that we will talk about in a second. You can put that to market very quickly, and you can reap the benefits of this more quickly than renegotiating your whole supply chain. Doesn't say that it's not important, but we think it merits to talk about this today, just because, yeah, there's not enough focus on that angle. And we see that also when we talk to our clients, and we normally see two groups in our clients. The first group have not really made a decision yet, or they have made a delayed decision. So, and I mean, I'm sure many of you will empathize with this, that they just didn't have the feeling that they could just raise the prices across the board by 10%. Yeah, this is something really new, and we all like have good client relationships, and just increasing the prices across the board didn't feel like something they could do straight away. And but that meant that this was a total squeeze on margins at the start. And I've heard from many companies that they've only just started to pass some of it through in the middle of this year. Then there's the other camp that already has started to pass on cost, but they don't really have a strategy in mind, and that's because they were successful in doing so. So they've passed the increase through, and maybe some of you also have done that already. And to some extent, there's the feeling you can get away with it because many do it. It's in the news. Your customers understand it, and the sales teams feel kind of comfortable to talk to customers about that. However, the big issue that we see there is that tariff increases and price increases that you should do normally, they kind of blend. So people feel then bad about, or the sales team feels bad about, after having passed on a 10% tariff increase, to actually look at the usual price adjustments that you should do every year. Because we at Simon Kucher, we believe to keep your business healthy and to keep up with cost pressures to reflect product improvements, there should be some kind of evaluation of pricing and step up each year. But because tariffs have taken the front and center of the negotiation, it becomes a bit hard to actually push through the normal price step up. And so that of course then leads to a situation where your prices are not keeping up with the overall cost developments. So that all to say that we believe it's important to take proactive actions, and I'm sure you are curious to hear about that, how we then can tackle this issue. And for this, I hand over to Otmar.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, also a warm welcome from my side. I'm Otmar. I'm actually on the on the eastern side, on the same pond, I'm located in Vienna. I'm working a lot with DACH companies. And for these companies, obviously, the tariff situation is also really, really stressing on a really important topic. And I think what I would want to add with regard to what are now the strategies that you should take or you should think about is you should again think about how are the tariffs affecting your position, right? And what Adam basically said, tariff is a wedge, right? So it will affect your price situation. So it means it kind of will also affect your positioning compared to the competition that you have in the market. And what we typically look at Simon Kucher is, we call it the value map, where we look at the perceived price of your customers and the perceived value of your customers, right? And somewhere there, typically in every industry, there's a consistency corridor where you have price and value in the equilibrium, which obviously also depends on your competition. And this is really a fact that I'm missing in most discussions with my clients and with all the industrial companies, because most see it very digital. They say, hey, I have 10 or 15% tariff on top of my product, so I just put this on top of my products, and everything will be fine. And I mean, Adam already showed there's also the topic of elasticity, which will kick in some extent. And what we structured for our companies basically is a matrix which defines different, let's say, different strategies for different situations. And I think this is paramount to also analyze with regard to your current situation, not just how are your products affected by tariffs with regard to the different supply chain streams and so on, but how does your tariff exposure look like compared to your competition? So how does your competitors' tariff exposure look like? Are these just producing locally in the US? Different locations, how are these locations then affected by tariffs into the US, and so on and so forth? And this really makes, let's say, the magic sauce in order to how to react, because there's different situations. You could be in a margin squeeze situation, where you say, hey, I'm highly affected, but my competitors are not. There could be also the other way around. You're not affected, or you're less affected than your competition. And then there is probably, which is true for a lot of industries, a lot of, let's say, companies, there's the price pressure zone where everybody is affected. And let us go into some of these quadrants, see what is the situation, and also discuss what could be potential solutions on the commercial side. And let's start with the margin squeeze. So as I said, basically you're manufacturing, for example, in the UK, you want to sell into the US market. Let's say part of the US, part of the value chain has a very high tariff exposure, and your competition, let's assume they're US competitors, they're much less affected in the tariff situation. So what basically will happen to your positioning? Your positioning, obviously, you will let's say, worsen off. Your prices will increase, and your value might stay the same, right? So we see this on the next slide, where you basically then have a couple of options. Where you have been before in the consistency corridor, you're now shifted by the tariff exposure into, let's say, the higher price ranges out of the consistency corridor. And there you typically, you could say, hey, I really have to focus on clear USPs. I have to, let's say, identify segments. I have to identify specialized products, specialized markets, where my perceived value is even higher than my normal portfolio or by my normal customer groups. And I could, let's say, or justify this higher price level. Then there is other things we want to talk about into more detail. You could also think about boost value through bundling. And on the next slide, you see one of the examples, which I think is very, very, very tangible for most of the people. There's a bundling example of an EV company, of EV suppliers, where they basically bundle together the, let's say, the hardware offering, the EV, the car that is sold, together with a subscription for the charging subscription. And typically before it was like 42 pay and the 700 subscription. And what you could do, what you could think of, and this is also what, for example, Tesla is doing, what, for example, BYD and so on and so forth are doing. They're thinking about how can we increase the value of our offering by bundling together, for example, in this case, a 2-year subscription of the supercharging. And in that sense, also rectifying a higher price, a price increase, but with an additional value that they basically sell to the customer. And this we see happening not only in the car industry, we see this happening also in the machinery industry, component manufacturers, and so on and so forth. Bundling hardware also together with services is a really strong tool in order to improve the value of your offer. And the second topic, what you definitely should think about is because the world is not just ones and zeros. So it's very complex. You will have different customer segments, and you will have to define a strategy on how to react to these different customer segments. And I think, Kim, this is a project you just did, so maybe
I can share the logic about that, because I mean, let's imagine we have taken the first step and increased the price, but we are in a situation where we just are not able to push through the increase with all our customer segments. Then, of course, we move to discounting. And discounting per se is not a bad thing. We always say that a good discounting strategy is important, especially in your businesses where you have so many different customer segments, willingness to pay, sizes, products. So you need a bit of discounting to make sure you adjust to the willingness to pay. But what often happens is that if we're in a panic situation and we reduce our price, the sales team jumps to the biggest discount that is available for everyone. And that's what we think should be avoided. So here, and that looks a bit complex, these things can be much simpler, but we've done an exercise where we have defined the customer segments. Different industries that you sell into might have a different willingness to pay. You look at also the size, so your A, B, C, D customers, so your largest or your smallest customers, and then even based on sometimes the product portfolio, because the value of different product categories, articles that you sell can be really different, you give some different discounting freedom and max limits. So this is complex. I've recently also done this with a materials producer, and the matrix looked much simpler. It was basically just on customer size, but the key is have a structure in place and have the governance in place to make sure that discounts are not just given away, but there is kind of a value behind that for you as well.
Exactly. And let's not jump into the most fun zone, at least for me, the price pressure zone. And why do I say fun? Because it's so funny when talking to companies that believe they are in the price pressure zone, because what they're basically then saying is, hey, I mean, it's so easy. Everybody, all my competition are producing in Europe, for example, so they will all get the tariff, the same tariff. So we just raise prices by this tariff and everything will be fine. And I think Adam very nicely already showed that there is this thing called elasticity, which is in the end affecting us all, right? So even if all the competition is increasing prices the same level, there will be elasticity at some point kicking in and might affect your volumes, right? And for this, you also need to have a strategy. The strategy could be to think about less expensive alternatives, right? So how could you use less expensive alternatives in order to reduce, again, the price of your products by also reducing value, but also with clear upselling paths, clear upselling premiums, and so on and so forth, to basically have the chance to make up for that. And also what this situation shows very nicely is today and more than ever is the time to strengthen your sales teams, right? I mean, what's clear, it's going to be tough out there. It's going to be tougher. It's going to be a battle around market shares, and you need to basically prepare the sales teams as good as possible in order to succeed in this market. And when jumping a slide further, we see...
Actually, Otmar, can I pop in there? If you roll it back one more. Angela's been asking some great questions in the chat, and I think it is this idea. So this is the idea of that consistency corridor, perception of price on the y-axis, perception of value on the x, And you can be high value, high price, low value, low price. That's all fine. There is a difference in elasticity. So in cases where there's really not an alternative, the question that was coming in was, why can't I just pass it all through? There are definitely areas where that's not an issue. Our founder, Herman Simon, and I read a lot, and I think very early on he was pointing out that there are a subset of manufacturers, UK manufacturers, German manufacturers who might make something that is so unique, an input to a semiconductor manufacturing equipment, that no one else in the world makes one. And so they are pretty much immune to tariffs. They can pass it through all the way. That ultimately results in inflationary effects and everything becoming more expensive. But in that situation, you can pass it through. However, this idea of most products are not in that quadrant. If you are, consider yourself a lucky one. The risk there is that if it gets abnormally high, that it might become an attractive market for someone else to enter. But for the most part, people are going to have a volumetric response. And as prices go up, everybody in your market, you can all raise your prices, but as things get absolutely more expensive, people will start to make trade down decisions, both in their personal consumption and their business consumption. And things that, we're starting to see headlines about the luxury home market slowing down, not as many vacations. If you look at some of the leading indicators that sort of suggest of, where the economy is going, hotel room bookings and things of that nature, those are those leading indicators that people are making choices about cutting things out and not consuming. And so ultimately, as tariffs come in and push up ubiquitous pricing on a lot of the goods and services that do have alternative options, you will see some responses. They take a while. And I think that's the thing that I know certainly on our side of the pond, people are very impatient. And so they say, well, the tariffs, I read about them in April. Nothing's happened yet. It must be no big deal. But they're going to take months and months to play out. And there's a huge lag effect. We saw that with inflation as well, about a 12 to 18 month lag between headline and action and decisions, because that's about how long it takes to kind of unravel these things. So that's what we're moving through right now. So thank you for the question, Angela. Othmar, just wanted to use this to point out that that's kind of what's going on. And I think Othmar nailed one of the answers is you can take your own product and make multiple versions of it. So that LEA, the less expensive alternative, a great response right now. Maybe if you have something that has all the features in it, everything is bundled and packaged in super high value, high price. Don't drop the price. That's the wrong move. That is where price wars come from. Always have to de-feature and take things away. And manufactured goods, sometimes that's harder because you have a whole production line, but you can start by taking away some of the commercial elements. Maybe it's some of the warranties, maybe it's some of the service elements, to start fast and then start to make multiple versions to hit different points on a product lineup like this.
And I really like the point you made, Adam, about choice, right? And what we do as also consumers, we change our choices, right? We think about, do we really need this and that and so on and so forth. And I mean, this is also true for B2B companies and procurement guys, right? So, I mean, you make choices, and this is what basically a less expensive alternative is all about. It's about being able to make choices, not just on the price, but on the value of different services, different, let's say, features and so on and so forth. And I mean, you have multiple, let's say, examples in the industry. You have the Trump lasers, you have the Atlas Copus G range, which is basically a stripped down compressor system and so on and so forth. And this is also not something new, right? We always had these things like for certain segments, certain, let's say, also regions. We had to do this all the time, and these are the tools we also need to use in the tariff environment. And the second topic we wanted to talk about is really enable your sales teams, enable them to really be better in the market. And again, Kim, I think you did some projects on this recently.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a topic in inflation, in normal price increase situations. We suggest to run these trainings, but of course, with the added complexity of tariffs, this is a common objection, especially when for example, your competitors haven't moved up the price yet. Customers come back and potentially complain about it. So what we always say is really equip your sales team beforehand, make sure they know the value story. and make sure they know the common objections, also the counter questions that you can ask. If a customer says, well, your competitor hasn't yet increased the prices, why do you have to? Maybe ask them, are you sure they can maintain the quality and service that you're used to if they're not passing these costs through? And then, of course, also to select some counter arguments, and also important to plan the concessions. So what I mentioned earlier, if we are panicked and not prepared, we tend to just offer the biggest benefit, the biggest goodie that we have in our bags to our customer teams. But really thinking about before, what can I give away? What is maybe not so important to me, but what will actually help my clients? So linking back to the less expensive alternatives as well. Maybe my client is fine without the expensive service that I deliver. So maybe I take that out and then I can maintain my price and still be profitable. So really preparing the team is important to make sure they can do good negotiations.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe also one remark. I mean, most of the sales head tell me, yes, but this is either way what my sales rep should be doing, right? And you're absolutely right. The 20% best ones, they have this in their hearts. They do this every day and night. But you have also a big majority who needs some support. And why do I say that? Why do we know that? When we remember back to the recent post-COVID times, it was also everything about price increase. And I have seen so many companies that left their salespeople alone. They had no, let's say, aligned argument on why, what are the arguments, why we increase, what are the objection handling arguments, and so on and so forth. I have seen this numerous times, so it definitely makes sense to also prepare your sales guys on that.
No, Othmar, that's universal. I think we joke that during inflation, it caught people off guard because most of the sales force hadn't seen that. We had a record 15-year kind of upward trajectory run in the States, and you had to have been around in the early 90s to have seen an inflationary number kind of anywhere close to what just happened. When the thing comes to in tariffs, you had to have been around for the Smoot-Hawley Act about 100 years ago. So unless you have any sellers who are about 130 years old, most of them have not had to deal with this and been trained up. And so while it's not a novel concept, they really haven't seen it in a long time. And so taking the time to walk people through why it's important and getting them prepared mentally to deal with it is an easy, quick win that people are taking.
Absolutely. And I mean, what's new? We have so many new tools. And we're not going into all the details, but just one example here. Where is a project where I basically used AI to also generate for our sales teams hunting lists. Because it will also be the case that you maybe need to find new customers, new customer segments, and so on and so forth. And I think it's all about making it most easy for your salespeople. There's also tools on objection handling, on value arguments, and so on and so forth. So there's a ton out there which you definitely should use. And if you hadn't, take a look into it. They really make the days easier for your salespeople. So last but not least, we have the price advantage zone. Which you could argue is a good zone. It's an easy zone. It's not that easy. I mean, if we look on the next slide on the positioning, how it's affected, it really depends on what you want to, let's say, do with this situation, with this advantage. Do you just want to, let's say, keep the prices in line with your competition? Do you want to monetize premiums? I mean, this is then also a situation where you could say, hey, I really start monetizing the services that I deliver into the market that nobody was paying for. This is really the time you could do so. It could also be the case that you want to streamline your product offering. Yeah, you're getting rid of some of the premium things in order to come a little bit down with let's say, your positioning and gain market share. So it really depends on your strategy. And I think this is also what I kind of want to sum up with the situation. Everything is obviously very unpredictable and everything is dynamic, right? So as Adam said, it might be the case that it changes overnight. We don't know what's so to say here to stay and what's not. So I think what it also pinpoints towards, and we also saw this in the beginning of the inflationary times, and pricing has to be more agile. right? And for this, obviously, you have a ton of tools. You have AI engines on pricing. There's pricing tools that we implement with our customers in order to be much quicker to the market. Look at the reactions of the market. Also, how is your win rate? How is your market shares affected by the new, let's say, price levels dictated by the tariffs, and so on and so forth. And this is paramount that you really also look into this and invest into this, because what we have seen, AI is really happening in such supply chain forecastings, in predictive maintenance, so in technical things, and so on and so forth, process automation. Their AI really has come to its place, but and you see this on the next slide, but in pricing, commercial excellence topics, AI still is underused, and it offers huge potential, whether it's pricing, whether it's sales automation, but also how you document a tariff and manage basically the whole tariff exposure.
And I mean, for the experts on the call, of course, there's a fine line between machine learning, AI, but the essence is automating some of the complexity. We've talked before about a Caterpillar, or I've worked with a component manufacturer that has over 2,000 SKUs, and I think that's not even the largest portfolio that we have here on the call. It is just very hard to get control over the different opportunities and the different price moves you need to make, either because your product portfolio is big or because you have global complexity in your supply chain. So a bit of automation and also AI, if it's possible, definitely helps.
And before we move to the question, because I've seen that a couple of them in the Q&A section, what do we want to conclude with, right? And as Adam said, if you remember one thing from the webinar, which is tariffs are a wedge and they're affecting you, I think there is a second thing you should remember, and it's act now, right? I mean, there is definitely a situation where you are affected, whether positively, negatively, and so on and so forth. A wait and see attitude we have seen is the worst you can do, also in the inflationary times. What we have experienced there. You need to have a scenario planning. I see a lot of companies establishing task forces that really monitor the market and come up with strategies. And you need to talk to your customers. The sooner better than the later.
Yeah, and we move to questions. We send that through if you want to read a little bit more. We also publish lots of free resources on our website, so you can download this and have a read. But now on to questions.
Thank you very much. What we'll do is that at the bottom you have an opportunity to ask questions. We've got a couple coming through. There's been a couple sent to us as well. We've got about 12 minutes and just shy, or about a minute wrap up. You might have seen this pop up. You can answer that now. There's a quick two question poll, or you can answer it after the questions at the end. I'll start with a question from Akash, which asks, these are predominantly strategies to mitigate tariffs, but have you seen opportunities to leverage price increases to push a new market positioning as premium?
Absolutely. And I think it came out early. There's two ways that the macro environment helps support pushing price. One is it gives people kind of a cover. That was something that kind of hit the headlines in America when Amazon floated the idea of adding a surcharge, not a premium product release, but just passing it through, and that was quickly knocked down. But it is the right response. Much like in 2022 was a ideal time to point at inflation and say we have to go up. The macro environment right now lends itself to, hey, look, it's not that I'm trying to do this. I'm not trying to generate an abnormal return. I am trying to keep my viable business going. This is not an option. And so let's work together. You saw in that math as to why the selling party has been lowering prices, which has been really counterintuitive to Americans to say, well, why are they bringing prices down as a tariff comes in? Now you all understand, like, that's what they have to do to keep the volume moving. But if you have a product that's either perceived as a premium or you have a little bit of power, one of my favorite headlines that came out right away was the friends at Louis Vuitton who said, yeah, we're taking prices up. And they openly said in the Wall Street Journal, we have no real exposure to tariffs, but we're doing it anyway. And so that's the most blunt and open version of you can do that right now, and it's a macro environment. Vindalay, I think you had a nice one about trend analysis and what do we see happening. I get that one a lot. No reason to believe that anything's going to change in the foreseeable future. We have a government now that is a fan of tariffs. As Richard pointed out at the start, they started in 2016, so it's not new. They're ramping it up now, but there's no reason to believe that they will stop using it as a instrument over the next 3 years. And then regrettably, after the first time this administration departed, another group came in. That group, a different party, left them in place. And so you could see an over-rotation and a dismantling in 4 years. I think there's a lot of people who hope and wait for that optimism, but that's, we would say categorically, the same group of people that said maybe inflation's transitory and I'll just sit here and absorb it for a year and hope it goes away. It doesn't go away. The effects are happening. To Othmar's ending point, acting now is the important thing, and just thinking about, I have to make a choice. And again, one of the key things is you are going to see volume moving around. You are probably going to be looking at a North American environment where we have simultaneous inflation or devaluing of some of our currencies, and as you will experience it, living with tariffs at the same time. And that's going to feel different than 4 or 5 years ago, where it was just inflation. And we see a need to navigate both of those unique factors simultaneously is the most probable scenario for the next few years.
Thank you. I'm actually going to abuse my my position with my chair privilege and inject one of my own questions, because particularly for our membership manufacturers, and on that presentation with the matrix of the different strategies, which I thought was really a clear way of presenting the sort of different case studies. But particularly within manufacturing, do you have any idea or some more sort of examples about how manufacturers, that bundling piece I thought was really fascinating, and if you have any examples potentially through your clients or ideas about how manufacturers might go about take that opportunity, because I think that's probably quite a nascent thing, and at least my experience speaking to our members is not something you see too often. It looks like a real potential strategy.
Uh, um, I can take that, and then please, colleagues, just fill in also your examples. I mean, in a nutshell, what we typically advise our companies, as I said, is make the possibility of choice for your customers possible, right? And it's not only about bundling or debundling. Typically, what I also see at the ones that make it best practice is offering versions. Right, so you refrain back from, hey, the customer asks about just this one product or this one, let's say, machine configuration, whatever it is, including a service portfolio. It's more about, okay, customer, I know what you asked for. This is, on the one hand, the real premium stuff. Everything is in the full service package and so on and so forth. But obviously, what we also have is the less expensive alternative, which could be a streamed down product. It could also be just a pure product without any services, or in the sense of what I see with a lot of, let's say, industrial companies that rely heavily on also high machine capacity utilization. If, for example, you would guarantee me that you take these and these amounts over this periods of time in certain, let's say, also volume buckets and so on and so forth, I can make you a lower price, a better price, right? Which is also basically a service that you reduce to the customer where he maybe has not this stringent buying behavior. And I think this is really, really in a nutshell what we see in the industry happening and what should be happening, thinking about different offerings, thinking about proactively and not just reactively offering these choices for your customers to make.
And I think, James, for industrial manufacturers, it's really, really common, right? So full disclosure, I am a mechanical engineer, so I still think like one. And how many of you on the call at Make UK, someone calls in and say, hey, we want to buy a piece of your equipment. And you say, great, please answer these 300 questions. In about 2 months, we'll give you a price, because you're kind of complicating that commercial element. And it makes sense. You're trying to optimize the transaction and make sure you've got the perfect product at the best possible price. And the engineer mind is saying, well, it has this feature, I have to charge. It has this feature, I have to charge. And it makes logical sense, but it's very slow and it's not a great buying experience. What's happening right now with tariffs are causing people to shop. They're looking around. If you proactively come and say, hey, James, I know what you need. I do this all the time. I have a good, better, best lineup. Which one would you like? And what you're doing is you're consciously sub-optimizing each and every item, but you're making the process very easy. And so we would call that you're sort of trading price harvesting or skimming for velocity. And in an environment where people are going to be open to switching vendors, being able to come to the table with a really easy to consume package, and then also to Othmar's point, hitting multiple points. You know, we have the cheap, cheerful package, and we have the full bells and whistles package. Which one would you like? That's a great way to navigate and get ahead of your competition right now. And as the volume starts bouncing around, hoover some of it up for yourself.
One of the questions, we got a lot about anything that might require, administrative effort, whether it be, tax, pricing, as we've talked here. Particularly, it's evidently still stuck in my mind, that sort of that matrix grid of the different strategies. How do you recommend, or how do you see clients managing that? Is that something that's often taken on in-house with existing stuff? Is it often a new role that's needed to be created in those companies that potentially aren't experienced in such proactive pricing strategies, or is it relatively once you've got the knack of it, particularly in SMEs, is it something that MDs can manage in and of themselves? Or what sort of approach do you recommend normally in terms of the sort of the administrative point of managing those pricing strategies if you don't really have one already?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of scale dependence on that, depending how small, medium, large your firm is. But I think in a lot of these points, it happened with inflation. It's happening right now again with the tariffs. The first thing is just, do we have a group who's thinking about it? Yes or no? Pretty binary response. And then you tend to see people sort of stand up a working group, war room, give it whatever name you like, and bring some real attention to it. As you work through something like the 2x2 matrix that Othmar was sharing, you might discover, you know what? We're not that exposed. To Angela's question, we're in a pretty good power position. We're going to be able to pass through most of this. We're feeling pretty good about it. We don't have to hire people, buy tools, and really try to systemically change our business. We're good. What mostly comes out of it, and we were cautioning people this, 5 years ago, we'll tell you all again, like taking the time to invest in a person and the capabilities to respond to this volatility is probably a no-lose bet. Worst case scenario, the tariffs go away, inflation resides, and you're still more nimble and you can move quicker. And you have a central group or individual who's dedicated to always asking ourselves, are we pricing correctly? Are we pushing the top line with the same energy we put into our Lean Six Sigma supply chain initiatives and manufacturing rigor? And if things don't subside, and we do live in that world that we think is more probable of elevated inflation and tariffs perpetuating, then you're better suited for those tides.
Maybe adding to you, Adam, I have seen a tremendous increase in these dedicated functions. You could call it pricing manager or whatever, since the inflationary times past COVID. And just as a benchmark for your participants, I mean, if you're not having one, you're probably belonging to the lower half, right? So I see 50% of the companies really have invested into these functions, and they now also have a big advantage because they're exactly these people that Adam was mentioning. They're thinking about what are the strategies, what should we do, and so on and so forth, because this cannot be done just by the sales reps or the local entities or MDs.
Right. Well, that takes us almost right to the very end. It leaves just 1 minute for close. You might see popped up earlier that two question, potentially 3 question poll. So if that's hiding behind your Zoom, click on that now. That just leaves me to say thank you very much to our participants today. So thank you very much to Richard of Make UK, from the home team, and from our colleagues at Simon Kucher, with Adam, Kim, and Othmar. So I'll end it there, and we're just in time, so everyone can hopefully get a few emails done before lunch. But thank you very much. I hope it's been very insightful. I know I've learned a lot about those strategies, and something I'll be looking into following this call. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Good day. Bye.